Hi, I'm Karen Debonis. Thanks for tuning in. I'd like to share the insights I've gained into my own people pleasing and, more importantly, the steps that I've taken to break free and continue to take to break free. I'm also a writer. My memoir is about my people pleasing, and you'll hear a little bit about it in this presentation, as well as some excerpts that I'll read. I have lots to share, so let's get started. So the memoir that I wrote is about my people pleasing and the devastating consequences for my family. The reason I'm writing it and sharing it here and other places is because I believe that we all grow when we learn from each other's mistakes and share our vulnerability. One of my favorite books about people pleasing is The Disease to Please by the late Harriet B. Breaker, PhD. And she has a saying, sometimes we can see in others what we can't see clearly in ourselves. And that's really the gist of why I share, because I know that people pleasing is something that others struggle with. And I believe when they read my book, they will see themselves in ways perhaps they hadn't seen them before. And having our eyes open is the first step in solving the problem. So I'm going to read some excerpts from my memoir, and here's my first one. When I was 6, my mom brought me to her hair salon for a trim of my long, thick mane. The petite hairdresser with a tall pile of bleach curls atop her head took an inch or two off my length. Then, brandishing her thinning shears, she left billowing piles of blonde fluff on the floor and a pencil-thin ponytail on my head. I felt as light as a butterfly. When we got home, I flitted around for my dad, showing off my skinny hair. My mom waited for me to flutter away before she complained to my dad, but she didn't wait long enough. I heard her say my hair was ruined. She sounded angry. I didn't understand. Mommy had smiled and told the lady my haircut looked nice. Mommy said thank you. Mommy was so nice. She would never be mad at someone. By 6 years old, I had learned some important rules. 1, when you're mad, act like you're not, at least until you get home. 2, give a compliment, even if you don't mean it. 3, always be agreeable. The rules would be reinforced over and over in the years ahead until they became part of me, until I became the so nice mommy, until the only way I knew to be was a so nice mommy who smiled to hide her anger. I became a woman who had never learned to speak up for herself and a mother who couldn't speak up for her child. It's a hard truth to tell, but with your support, I will do it. So, what to expect from this presentation? Again, I'll read some excerpts from my memoir, and I'm going to talk about what I call facets of people pleasing. It's not everything on people pleasing because that would be a whole book in addition to my own. And this comes from my own experience, reading and research that I've done to inform my writing and also to put together this program and some other programs that I offer through my website, and interactions with other people pleasers. And especially over the past couple of years, it's been very informative and enlightening for me. So what I'll suggest is that, whatever I say, accept what fits, reject what doesn't. We're all unique, and not all people pleasers are the same. I do have one caveat. I'm not a therapist or a life coach. I won't have all the answers. If you contacted me for support, I would give you that support, but I cannot counsel you in the way that a therapist or a life coach could. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, how to get that support for yourself if you need that. But I do want to leave you with 10 steps to a stronger self. So you'll walk away today with some concrete steps that you can take immediately. In fact, you're doing one of them right now, and I won't tell you what that is yet. I have a saying, admitting a problem is a deeply courageous act. Respond to those who share their story, not with shock, but with awe. And I share that when I do this webinar live, because it's very vulnerable when we share our truths, and it's important in a group that people respect the courage that it takes to share. So, as you hear my story and as you might talk to other people and share your own story, just remember that it does take a lot of courage to do what you're doing and to change. So we need to be respectful of that. So, what is a people pleaser? Lots of definitions out there. Mine is someone who habitually prioritizes others' needs, wishes, or happiness over their own. And habitually is really the operative word here because everybody people pleases sometimes. You say yes when you really want to say no. You take on more than you want to. You bite your tongue and just, don't speak up. We all do that. It's part of life. But people pleasers really do it habitually. So, for example, they regularly say yes when their heart screams no. They have a pattern of feeling like a pushover, a doormat, a wet dish rag. And I use these cliches intentionally because not everybody really understands what people pleasing is all about. But when I say pushover, you get it. When I say doormat and dish rag, you get it. People pleasers have a history of being afraid to make waves, not wanting to rock the boat. Again, I'm using cliches intentionally. And for the editors here, I should tell you that I do not use cliches like this in my memoir. People pleasers are constantly getting walked on, and they have a recurring fear of conflict. So it's really something that can impact every aspect of their life, as it did for me. I love this graphic because people pleasers like me don't let on how we're feeling. We look the same, our happy smiley face, whether we're happy, bored, angry, whatever we're feeling, we just don't let on because the the purpose or the goal is to be agreeable. I'm not saying that that's how it should be, but we have a hard time kind of showing our true feelings if they're negative feelings. How do we get to be people pleasers? Again, it's different for everyone, but it really comes down to nature versus nurture. So nature is your hardwiring. For example, your genes, your temperament from your very first day on Earth. Physical attributes, for example, let's say there was an individual who was very tall and very big. They might go through life feeling powerful and strong and not back down to anybody. Or they might go through life feeling uncomfortable with, attention being on them and maybe they get teased as a kid. So physical attributes affect a lot of kind of how we respond to our world. And for empaths, who are people who really feel others' pain, I consider myself an empath, that that can lead to people pleasing because we don't want to see people suffer. We want to, make things smooth for them and nice for them. And sometimes we take on that suffering ourselves. That's not healthy. But empaths do have a tendency toward people pleasing. And then there's nurture, which is how we were raised. So family of origin values, were you encouraged to speak up at home? Did you have to be quiet? Were you not allowed to talk unless your parents, invited you to talk? What is your society and community like and your values? And look at, the US compared to, let's say, North Korea, the differences in values there. And even within our own country and different communities, there are different values about speaking up and how we handle ourselves and that type of thing. Culture is similar. In some cultures, women are not allowed to speak as freely. In some cultures, they are. And that can be a microculture, even in the house, in the home, or it can be a larger culture within a country or the world. And our environment. So think about someone who maybe grew up in downtown Manhattan in New York City versus someone who grew up in the Midwest on a farm. The interactions they have with people throughout their lives are going to be very different, and it could make them, in either way, lean toward people pleasing or lean toward being assertive and speaking up for themselves. So it's really different routes for everybody, and for many people, those nurturing roots were less nurturing. So many people pleasers have a history from their childhood of dysfunction at home, either addictions or abuse or neglect, that type of thing, and so their people pleasing is a learned behavior to just try to keep the peace at home and keep themselves safe. It's actually it's a great coping mechanism, which doesn't serve them as they get older. For me, that's not the case. For me, it was lack of role models. My parents were wonderful, loving people, both of them people pleasers. And although my siblings, I'm one of six, my siblings somehow learned to speak up for themselves. When I look at myself, my hardwiring, where I was in the family, who I am, how I respond to the world, somehow I did not get that lesson. So again, it's very, very different for all of us. Here's another way that I think of people pleasing and kind of how it manifests itself within me. The internal discomfort of not pleasing someone outweighs the potentially negative consequences of pleasing them. So think about if you had a scale, it was the to please or not to please scale. If I don't please someone, if I push back against a request that they make of me, or if I tell them I don't like something that they did, that causes internal discomfort within me. May not be the case for you, but that's what happens for me. However, if I please them and I do what they want me to do and I become who they expect me to be, that's also discomfort. I can feel overwhelmed, I can feel overworked or overextended or just completely inauthentic, which was a feeling that I had for much of my life. So for me, when I'm at that moment of potential conflict and I can either speak up and say something or not, there's each to please or not to please, each carries some weight. And as you can see in this graphic here, for me, that internal discomfort of not pleasing weighed more heavily on me. And organisms of all type gravitate away from pain. And so what I did was I gravitated away from that internal discomfort toward the different type of discomfort that I would get when I was agreeable all the time. So again, this is just a little bit of a different way of looking at people pleasing and how it manifests in itself. If you have a different way of looking at it, I'd love to know, and I'll give you ways to get in touch with me later. So as I said, we're all different as people pleasers. And again, in the Disease to Please by Dr. Breaker, she breaks people pleasing down into 3 types based on their underlying causes. So for some people, the underlying cause is a mindset, and it's very distorted thinking, like everyone has to like me. I have to be friends with everybody. I can never say no to people. So that's a distorted thinking. The second one, the underlying cause are habits, where you're always just doing too much too often. You never say no. You're the mom that always, bakes for the PTA bake sale, and the person at work who always takes on extra projects and just always doing. It's a bad habit. And the final type is feelings, where people are avoiding uncomfortable and frightening feelings. So I have taken some time and thought about these different types. And by the way, we all have a little bit of each type in us. Some of us kind of lean more heavily to one side of the triangle or not, but we usually have a little bit of all of this together. For me, I know that I fall much more heavily in the feelings type. So I am very uncomfortable with confrontation, and I'll talk about that in a couple of slides. And, my people pleasing is to avoid that discomfort, just like I talked about on the scale. I don't want that internal discomfort of not making people happy. So that's kind of what has always driven my people pleasing. In terms of mindsets, cognitively and rationally, I never believed everyone has to like me. However, looking back at my behavior, it certainly suggested that that's what I believed. I certainly acted in ways like I thought everybody had to like me. So it's really, these are again facets of people pleasing, something to understand about how people pleasing manifests in different folks, and then you can figure out kind of where you fall um, in this. And one thing I'll say about habits, I pretty much have never been that person who does too much. At least, I did too much sometimes of my own accord, but not because other people asked me to. And one of the ways that I think about that is, if you ask me, can you finish this project for me? You are giving me the power to say no. You're handing it to me. So it's easier for me to say no at that point. Where if there's an assumption that, things are kind of going along the way they're going in a social setting, or an assumption that, well, everybody's going to do this together, or you're going to do this or whatever, then in order for me to stand up, I have to take the power. And that's more difficult for me. I'm learning, but it's more difficult. So again, that's just a little nuance, something that I've observed within myself. People pleasing is emotion driven. Even if you fall into one of the other types, the mindsets or the habits, there's always emotion that's driving it. And if I had you in person, I would ask you, what do you think that emotion is? So it's fear. For some of us, for many people pleasers, it's fear of abandonment, because when they were children, their needs were not always met, and people may have been in and out of their lives a lot. Sometimes it could be divorce or separation. Sometimes it's completely out of anyone's control. If there's a death in the family, if a parent or a loved one or caretaker passes away, that can kind of manifest as fear of abandonment throughout life. Other times it's fear of being ostracized, fear of not fitting in, fear of people, laughing at you or criticizing you. So it's really, there's really a lot of fear involved in people pleasing, and that's all the more reason to be compassionate with yourself if you struggle with this, because we all want to avoid fear. And we can't, it's part of life, but it's important to recognize that that's what's driving some of this. People will talk. I know for me, one of my biggest fears in my life of people pleasing is that people would talk. But what's interesting is they're not talking about you as much as you think they are. And they may not be saying what you think they're saying. So let's look at this a little bit more. So across the top of this chart, we have what we think people will say, what people may actually say. So the first row is if you are nice. What we think people will say if you're nice all the time is, what a nice guy, what a great guy, what a sweet person. They're just always doing these wonderful things. That's what we think. And so we change our behavior. We sometimes engage in people pleasing because we want to elicit that outcome from others. We want to believe that they are thinking that we're great guys. What may they actually be saying? What a pushover. Can you imagine he let them get away with that? She never stands up for herself. That could be what they're saying. So we're making our own lives miserable because we're trying to manipulate other people's thinking or behavior, and yet we're blowing it. And on the next row, if you're not nice, what we think people will say is, she's such a bitch. And that's why, again, we're afraid of not being nice because we don't want people to talk about us that way. But what may people actually be saying? They may be saying or thinking to themselves, she's so strong. I admire her standing up for herself. He doesn't let anybody walk all over him. So this is an eye-opener. Think about, what we're expecting and what may actually be happening. Do you know the difference between being kind versus being nice? I never thought about this distinction until a couple years ago. And then I thought, when I learned about it, I thought, oh, it must just be me. Everybody else has this figured out. But when I've done this workshop and focus groups and some other things that I do, the feedback that I've gotten is that other people have not made this distinction also. So, a kind person is loving and giving out of the goodness of their heart. Let's say that you're asked to bake something for your church, and you want to be involved. You want to do good things. You want to be part of that community. You enjoy helping out others. That's a kindness. Where nice people focus on being good to others to the detriment of their own needs. So let's say that I'm always asked to, you know, bake something for my church or to help out and fix something or whatever. And I do it to the point that I'm making myself sick or I don't have time for my family. And if I don't feel good about it, then it's not a kindness. I'm being nice. I'm afraid to ask for what I want for fear of creating conflict. So it's an important distinction to make. And yeah, and another way, sometimes it's hard to tell, am I being nice or am I being kind? And the way I distinguish it or think about it is that you want to think about how you feel at that moment. Because sometimes we say yes and we feel good about it, and then we kind of walk away and we're like, oh, darn, I got manipulated again. So think about it, how you feel at that moment or very shortly after. And then how do you feel after a day or two or after the whatever the situation was happened? Sometimes you might feel resentful when you say yes, but then after it's over, you think, yeah, I really felt good about that. I'm really glad I did it. So a couple different time perspectives will help you figure out if you're being kind or you're being nice. So I mentioned conflict before, and what drives me is really avoiding conflict. So conflict-averse, conflict-avoidant, those are popular terms that you see, phrases that you see different places. And it's an extreme discomfort with confrontation and going to great lengths to avoid it. And some of the experts will write about how this is the fear is real and the pain is real. So again, be gentle with yourself as you're pushing through this, because it is that fear of conflict is a real thing. And so what drives our behavior is thinking, please don't fight, please don't be mad, please don't hate me. We want to do anything possible to avoid conflict. And you can see where when children grow up in dysfunctional environments or environments of loss, family members are lost, that they they want everything to be nice, and it's scary for them. They think, well, if I'm not, if I cause trouble, maybe I'm going to disappear too. So it's important to think for yourself, how you feel about conflict and how that, if that drives your people pleasing. Boundaries are something else we hear a lot about in relation to people pleasing. And I did some work a while ago to try to figure out how I could explain boundaries or how I want to think about boundaries. Something that came up frequently that other people suggested was where you end and another person begins. And I had a little trouble kind of wrapping my brain around that. So how I think of boundaries, it's a way of honoring your autonomy. You're honoring the fact that you are a different person than everybody else, and you don't have to allow others' personalities or choices or expectations kind of infiltrate that boundary of who you are. Another way that it's been described is what you will and will not accept in your life. So look at this Venn diagram. There you are, and there your loved one is. Now they're kind of impinging a little bit on your boundaries there, on your personal space there. And frequently when you live with someone, I've been married for 39 years, and I can tell you, I'll do things because they make my husband happy, and he'll do things because they make me happy. So, as long as I'm able to to step back when it's not something that I want to do and say no, then it's okay. It's just kind of part of living with another person or being close to another person. With friends, we might have a little bit less of that crossover of boundaries. For colleagues, hopefully not too much crossover of boundaries, if at all. So think about, here's a great example. So let's say you don't allow smoking in your house, and you have some people over and somebody pulls out a cigarette and you say, I'd prefer that you not smoke. And they push back and give you a hard time. Well, it doesn't really hurt you like they say it will, and I won't blow it in your face, and blah, 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 blah. If you allow that, what you've done is you've allowed that person to kind of step into your personal space, step into your boundaries. And of course, the cigarette smoke is a real tangible thing, but it's also very symbolic about how you allow that. Where if someone comes in and you say to them, no, you're not allowed to smoke in this house, and maybe they get really mad and they end up leaving, you have respected your autonomy. You have honored your autonomy and kept your boundaries. It's a hard one for people pleasers. It's a hard one to develop these. But again, and I'll do some exercises at the end to help you establish these, but it's good to start thinking about it and realizing that it's important for you to maintain those boundaries. If you're a doormat, you lie like a rug. That's a tough one, huh? Not everybody wants to admit to being a liar, and I would never say that you are or say that about somebody else. But for myself, when I started kind of, reconciling all my people pleasing, I realized that, yes, I was a liar. I say no problem when it is a problem. I say you're right when I think you're wrong. I say I don't mind when I do. And I say I'd love to when I hate to. The lying isn't intentional, and some professionals will say that it's manipulative. I don't believe that because it's usually kind of operating on a very subconscious level. But again, once you're aware of this, facet of people pleasing, you might be able to pay attention to your own responses and catch yourself doing it. So I do have another excerpt that I want to read, and this is in relation to how I was raised at home and the values that I was raised with. And again, not everybody is going to have this a similar response to what I'm going to read to you, but it's important to share that this is one of the things that happened to me. My parents modeled what they believed to be the most important values for their children. Love thine enemy, turn the other cheek, forgive, do what Jesus would do. Everyone is a child of God. It wasn't until years later that I had an epiphany. I'm a child of God too. If someone was being a jerk to me and Jesus was around, I hope he would step in and tell them to knock it off. It was my self-imposed rule, ingrained by my upbringing, supported by my faith, warped in my mind. Blessed are the meek, for they do not make waves. Do unto others more than they do unto you. Love others as you have not loved yourself. And the underlying maxim was, others' needs are more important than your own. And I think oftentimes people with a strong religious upbringing really struggle to figure out that balance. How do I treat myself with respect and yet help others the way that I want to help them, or the way that my faith instructs me to help them? So you'll see in my book that this is something that I struggle with a lot, and it was tricky to figure out. There are a lot of books about kind of figuring this out for people of the Christian faith, how to respect your God, but also respect yourself as a child of God. I'm sure there are other resources for other faiths. I have not found them, but certainly be open to doing some reading because you may find some answers. Worse than lying, is people pleasing an addiction? Again, I'd never tell you I'd never, make you take on that label. For me, I do feel that it has been an addiction. The definition of an addiction is a strong inclination to do, use, or indulge in something repeatedly, even after repeated negative consequences. So for me, I had, lots of, lost friendships, mostly just loss of my sense of self and loss of my authenticity. And yet it kept going and going. It was bigger than I was to be able to, to break free of it. It took me a lot of work to get to that point. When we withhold our honest reactions, they get expressed in other ways. Addictions or habits that numb feelings, poor health. And a question that I have is it ever a disservice not to be honest? So, are there times when if you don't speak up to somebody, they're losing an opportunity perhaps to make a positive behavior change? Because sometimes we need honest people in our lives to kind of give us a reality check and let us know that something that we're doing is not working. I do know I've had times in my life when I have not spoken up and I felt like it was a disservice to that person. Maybe the friendship would have ended, but it might have been a chance for them to, have some self-reflection maybe that they hadn't had. So being compliant or submissive is a learned behavior. Therefore, it can be unlearned. That's the good news. So we're going to get to that in just a minute. I have one more excerpt that I wanted to read. And this is an example of my lying. So this actually took place more recently. It was about 3 or 4 years ago, but it did make it to my book. I hire a landscaper to install an informal garden path. It's a simple job, basically just laying pavers in the dirt and getting them reasonably level. Mike and I used to do these type of projects, but the pavers are heavy and our backs are old. Mike had drawn a simple diagram, which we explained to the boss, who gave it to his crew. On the hottest day of the century, I watched from inside in the cool of the window air conditioning as the 2 guys dumped a bed of sand, embed a paver, and bend over it this way and that with levels. What should be a quick and dirty process becomes slow and laborious. They're doing it all wrong. I wish I wasn't home so I wouldn't have to confront them. It would be easier to call the boss after the fact to complain. But I don't give myself a choice. Hey guys, your boss and I had agreed the path would need just an inch of sand. Tom, the older of the two, explains that because the yard slopes, to get the pavers level, they need more sand. It makes no sense, but I pretend I'm satisfied. I know it's not what I want. I know it, but I can't get myself to say it. An hour later, the path sits well above the grade of the lawn. Shit. I go out again. The sun is so hot it hurts my skin. It's hard to breathe. Tom and his partner stand away from the path in the shade, their shirts soaked, their faces redder than my geraniums. Guys, this is really way too high, I say. I've been doing this for 20 years, Tom says as he approaches me, and I've never done it any differently. He's very friendly and respectful, a nice guy. I like him. Tom proceeds to talk about the slipping hazard in winter if the path slopes too much and how I can create a swale next to it to drain the lawn. A little regrading of the grass and you're all set, he concludes. I know it's wrong. But on this day, when even the birds fly listlessly, I can't bring myself to tell them to do it over. So I lie. Okay, I guess you know what you're doing. It's a lie. I go back inside and work on this chapter, and I hate my weakness. To people please is to lie. For years, I didn't recognize it as such, but that's what it is. I admit my problem and know that I still have work to do. So, I hope you know that I have walked in these shoes. I know that they are tough, And, I'm walking a new path. So let me tell you how I did it. It's going to be scary. Courage is not the absence of fear, it's being afraid and moving forward anyway. So different versions of this quote have been attributed to Franklin D. Roosevelt, Mark Twain, and Nelson Mandela. This is my own particular take on it. It's scary. It's scary for me to think about causing conflict or standing up for myself. And I do it anyway. There's just no other choice. So, 10 steps to a stronger self. You have actually already completed number 1 because you are here. Actively explore outside yourself by reading, listening to podcasts, listening to others, and within yourself through introspection. So just being here today, you've learned hopefully things that you haven't learned before, or maybe you're thinking about them in different ways, and that gives you introspection. So you can think about your own behavior and start to make some changes. 2, share your successes and lapses in a safe place with a safe person. This is something that I've really found to be key, both for myself and for others who I've worked with. So, it's so easy. Sometimes the people pleasing we do is not monumental. It doesn't cause huge problems. Like when this always happens. The grocery store bagger puts the eggs on the bottom, and I don't say anything. Most of the time they don't break. I don't know if they ever have actually broken for me. So I let it go. I let it slide. And I realized that's how these things stay hidden, especially the small things, but they add up. So I started, first of all, telling my husband, which was embarrassing. I kept so much of this private. I post things on social media. I write about them on my blog. And when I go public like that, I can't hide anymore. So I really suggest that you find someone that you can share your successes and your failures and kind of, bring it out of the shadows. 3, specify your boundaries. So I talked about your boundaries. So I'm going to suggest that you make a list. Write down, finish these sentences or come up with other ones. I feel, whatever you feel. I feel, jealous when I see other people having big graduation parties. Guess what? You have a right to that feeling. I like small graduation parties, or I like scary movies, or I like soft ice cream. Yeah, there's a story in my book about how I let myself be talked out of eating soft ice cream, even though I really like it. So I think, I believe, I live, I work, and personal space boundaries. So are you not a hugger and you don't like people hugging you? Do you need a little more room between people than others? So really spend some time and define and specify what your boundaries are. Journal or write. And what I suggest is, again, the grocery store bagger with the eggs on the bottom, or the tomato, or whatever it is. Write that down, because again, it's a way of you getting out of the shadows and kind of confronting it. For me, writing this memoir and then reading it and just reading the things that I did was such an eye-opener. I mean, I knew that I did them because I wrote about it, but then reading it back again, it's like I couldn't hide anymore. So the point is that you go back and revisit or revise them. So at least go back and read what you've written. And then another way to do it is to revise that scene. So rewrite what happened and write down exactly what you would have said or done in that situation. So then you have an example. You can look at that and think, yeah, next time, that's what I'll do. Visualize success. I love to use visualizations. So think of a time you people pleased. Visualize how you wished you would have acted. Note your body language, your tone of voice, your facial expressions. In this visualization, use your five senses to make the scene come alive. So even if in the actual scene, let's say you're not eating or drinking something, just create, a latte in your hand or an iced tea or something like that. So what do you see, touch, hear, smell, and taste? And focus on your feelings of accomplishment and strength. We know the feelings of, shame and disappointment are there when you people please, but in your visualization, when you're kind of rewriting what happened, revisualizing what happened, focus on the feelings of accomplishment and strength. Don't let the other feelings, negative feelings, move in on you, but focus on feeling really strong. Create assertive mantras. So pick a people-pleasing behavior, like I can't say no. And you want to rewrite it as a positive behavior using the present tense starting with I. So an alternative to I can't say no is I say no when it serves me best. Now you're not going to say I'm going to start saying no. That's in the future. You're not going to say I'm going to try to say no. That's not good enough. The way these assertive mantras work is it has to be present tense and positive, as if it's already happening. I say no when it serves me best, as if it's already happening. Even if it's not, it doesn't matter. Another behavior, I do whatever anybody wants. The alternative would be I decide what's right for me, as if it's already happening. I back down if someone disagrees with me. The alternative, I express my opinions without apology, as if it's happening now and it has been happening. And you want to repeat these often and preferably aloud. So, put them on your notes on your phone or write them down and stick them in your pocket and keep them handy and revisit them frequently. Say no without saying no. I'm sure you've heard this. No is a complete sentence. It doesn't have to be explained or justified. If someone says, can you do X? You don't need to say, well, I'm really busy that day, and geez, I got to pick my mom up at the doctor's, blah, blah, blah. Nope, you can just say no, and that's it. You don't have to explain. But what I found, and I think is true for a lot of people pleasers, is that's kind of abrupt to go to never saying no to then all of a sudden just saying no. So it's important for you to find some alternatives that feel comfortable for you. One of my favorites is I'll have to pass. And I don't say why, I just say I'll have to pass. I'm comfortable saying that more so than I would be if it was just a flat out no. That won't work for me is another one I like. I'm not comfortable for that, I use. And here's a key one, let me get back to you. Because especially as you're learning these new behaviors, learning these new skills, you're going to have those moments of panic where you want to say no or whatever it is, and you just can't figure out the words and you kind of stumble. Buy yourself time. Let me get back to you. And then you can go back, revisit your assertive mantras, revisit your visualizations, write something down, kind of work it out, and then get back to the person and tell them no, or tell them you have to pass, whatever it is. So this is what we've done so far. Actively explore outside yourself and inside yourself. Share in a safe place with a safe person. Specify your boundaries. Journal or write, then revise or revisit. Visualize and practice. Create assertive mantras and repeat often. And write alternatives to saying no. So, 3 more. 8, identify role models. At the time, that excerpt that I read to you about the path that we had laid, at the same time I had a friend who was getting her kitchen redone, and the workers just kept really messing up. And she would just every day go down and say, guys, this isn't right, you got to do it over. And I was so impressed. So she is now my role model. There was also a clerk at my favorite indie bookstore once who had an interesting conversation with someone about wearing a mask. And she looks kind of like a mousy type of person, but boy, she just really stood up to this guy. So those are my role models, and I think about them and what would they do. Give yourself a daily nudge. Do one thing that we talked about here, or one thing that you've read or that has occurred to you otherwise. Do one thing to move yourself forward to break free of people pleasing. If you can't do that, then here's what I want you to do. I want you to ask yourself every day, am I ready to change? Some days your answer is going to be no. That's okay. Next morning, wake up, ask yourself again, am I ready to change? And you can Google stages of change. This is a behavioral change theory, and it's a way to kind of nudge yourself to move forward a little bit. Am I ready to change? Ask yourself every day. And 10, don't give yourself a choice, just like I did with the path. I still bungled it, but I made myself go out and do the best I could. It's the only way we're going to learn. So remember to be courageous. Seek help from a therapist or personal coach if you need it. If you pay attention and try some of these things and you just feel like you're not going anywhere with it, the roots may be too deep for you to dig them up on your own. So I strongly encourage you to find a therapist or a personal coach. I'll give you my my website and my email at the end if you feel like you need some help getting started with that step. I am more than happy to give you some direction. I've had a therapist myself for years, and I know that I would not have come as far as I could have without that help. So I'm not shy at all about mentioning that. Again, I make myself vulnerable, and it takes courage, but that's how we all will learn. And one final thing, I think about it this way: do the work, feel the change. So, the steps that I've laid out for you, some of the facets to help you understand. If you kind of show up each day in your people-pleasing life and practice some of these things and do some of these steps, you are doing the work. It's like quitting smoking. It's not going to happen perfectly the first time. It may take you a bunch of tries to really make it stick, but you're doing the work, and I guarantee you will feel the change. And for me, it's so subtle, it's even hard to explain, but it's just within myself. When I think about situations I might face or situations that I've been in before, I feel in myself that person that I'm imagining, who is me, is different. She's stronger. She's more self-confident. She stands differently. She thinks differently. I feel the change within me, and I think for me that even precedes some of the behavioral changes that I'm making, and that makes it possible. So know that it is a process, and you can do the work, and you will start feeling the change. You want to be, who you are and who you want to be, the person who you want to be. That's it for Wipe Your Feet Before You Walk All Over Me. I hope I got you thinking about things in a new way. I hope you'll visit my website, KarenDeBonis.com. I have lots of resources there and ideas to help you on your journey. While you're there, please subscribe, because you'll get my blog, my monthly newsletter, resources and updates about my memoir, because you'll want to know as soon as that's ready to go public. And while you're here, how about a thumbs up down below? That would be really awesome. And feel free to share this or share the link with anyone you know. So thanks again for stopping by, and good luck.